Awesome. Have you used this software before, Zencaster?
No, it's the first time I've heard of it.
It's pretty cool. It's handy because they record on both sides. So yours is going to be recording, mine's going to be recording. You'll have local copies in case something goes wrong. Then your local copy is there, and I could be like, "Hey, send me your copy and your
No
file,
word.
whatever." So
Okay.
that's handy. And I don't know. I used to have some more hiccups, but it seems like a pretty reliable thing now.
Hold on.
So
I'm gonna close my door real quick. Hold up.
cool, cool. I am disappointed that there is not a giant map of Middle Earth behind you. That would
Uh,
add so
Gives you
much
time.
like
I know.
authority to you being the granddaddy lore master
Yeah.
of all things Tolkien.
I don't know about that. I'm just an avid fan.
Well, I've encountered a few of those lately.
So I hear.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, so yeah, so it was fun when we watched this because you knew all the shit that was wrong with it, whereas I was just kind of like, I think the same with Ian and Marcus. We were all and Taylor. We were all just kind of like, well, we know that this isn't exactly right. The lore is mess. You know, we know it. We know a few things, but you like you knew stuff like stuff like with okay. Let's start with Galadriel. She seems
Okay.
to be kind of hot button, right? So one thing that I did not know about Galadriel is that she was actually older than Gil-galad.
Right.
So
So
like, yeah. What about
yeah. Yeah. So Gil-galad is actually relatively young as far as the Noldor go.
why
Surprising.
does he get to be High King if he's so young?
Um, Based on his lineage, um,
Okay.
so he is a son of a king. Well, it depends on. So Tolkien had a bad habit, and this is why it's funny that people freak out about what's canon and what's not canon so much because Tolkien was constantly changing it um, up until the day he died, almost. I think, and so it's not clear exactly who what the canon descent of Gilgalad is. He's either the son of Fingon, who is the son of Fingolfin, who was the High King of the Noldor in the First Age in Beleriand, or he is the son of Orodreth, who was the son of one of Galadriel's brothers, which would make him Galadriel's grandnephew.
Hmm.
Um, but either way, yeah,
Just depending on it. That's the problem. That is a problem with like figuring out what Tolkien meant by a lot of things. Like people always what I find online is people are like Tolkien said this, but then you find somebody else that Tolkien said this other thing, and they contradict each other.
yeah,
Like,
yep,
and so like, does it even? I guess it adds some flexibility to what people like the show's creators can do with it because you do have different versions and you can extrapolate from different concepts.
exactly, yeah, and I think to say that something is Tolkienish or faithful to his writings, I think it's more important that the themes and characters are consistent with those that we know he wrote about. And thus far, I would say the show is hitting the mark on that.
Where
Um,
would you say it's hitting it the least? Like, do you where are you the most critical?
um, I don't have a lot of criticisms around the themes and the characters yet. My major criticisms are around changes they've made to Galadriel's history,
Hmm.
and somewhat to her character. They haven't
Because
really,
she's a Mary Sue. Just kidding. Sorry.
yeah, obviously, yeah, and a very good swimmer. Um, no, but it's more around they haven't conveyed even at this point, even though this is thousands of years before the Lord of the Rings and her realm and Lorien. She's still thousands of years old at this point, and so I feel like they haven't adequately conveyed her gravity and nobility yet. There's been some scenes where they've touched on that, um, but things like her interactions with Elrond and Gilgalad, she should be afforded way more deference and respect given her age and her accomplishments at this point, and just her lineage, and the fact that she is one of the few um, high elves, elves of the light, who were born in Valinor, saw the lights of the trees before the ban of the Valar and the return of the Noldor to Middle Earth. So both Elrond and Gil-galad have never been to Valinor, and that mere fact would, they would hold Galadriel in very high respect. And that was another big. Speaking of the ban of the Valar, the whole concept that Gil-galad could bestow upon her the right to return to Valinor is a big lore faux pas, because she is expressly, at this point, expressly forbidden from returning. She was offered clemency at the end of the first age, after the war with Morgoth was over, and she refused it, partially because of her pride, partially because she wanted to stay because she felt she had a duty to face Sauron still, and she wasn't sure if he was defeated. So they did get that right. But because she refused that, the Valar maintained her ban, and she could not have returned if she wanted to. And Gil-galad is not, in any position to go against the commands of the Valar.
One reason I think maybe they're making Galadriel sort of younger seeming and more plucky. Like if that's kind of how I would describe her. She's a little like fierce and plucky. I think might be, and I'm just sort of guessing here, but might be to give her the ability to have a more dynamic character arc.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it doesn't really make sense to have her not, obviously she's what, like 4,000 years old or something already at this point, depending on how
add it up. Yeah.
it's
Like
many thousands. I mean, at this point, 4, 5, 6, whatever, many thousands of years old, has faced Morgoth, has, seen the light of the trees, all this. Obviously she's basically like an elder already, but they make her not that yet because they have to give her an arc from the beginning of the show to the end of the show. And if you start with somebody who's already kind of got it all, they're already a wise elder. They're, how do you make? I mean, basically, I guess they could have chosen not to make Galadriel a main character,
a protagonist,
but made her a secondary character that was like maybe a mentor or a. Because making her a protagonist, you can't just start with her already sort of having walked all that path and have developed so much, because then you just have a flat character. I mean, how much change can you have between the start of a show and the end of a show if she's already developed into this? That's my thinking on what maybe they were doing with her. But it is weird.
Yeah,
for sure.
No, and that's definitely fair. And I think that's a big part of it. I think that's a big reason why the choice of Galadriel I would say she's the primary protagonist of the show at this point. Like that kind of gave a lot of people pause. Another reason it gave people pause is going back to Tolkien's kind of vacillating on things. I mean, there are multiple versions of her history in the Second Age with Celeborn and it's not clear, which is the final accepted canon to Tolkien. There's multiple drafts. Like Christopher Tolkien goes into this in Unfinished Tales. So there is a lot of blanks they have to fill in, a lot of choices they're going to have to make on which version do they follow or not. But another interesting though is in any version you follow, though, she should be already married to Celeborn and he should be around somewhere. So I'm curious to see how they handle that.
Was she ever portrayed as a warrior, like fighting with a sword and like stomping ice trolls with ninja moves?
Yeah, I mean, one of her names from her mother translates into like man maiden because she was so tall and strong and athletic. So she definitely had physical capabilities, and beside the point that she is a high elf, so she could I guess in modern interpretation of their abilities, she could definitely pull off things like that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny. Like, this is one of the reasons people have been critiquing her character, and I think it's one of the weakest is that she's not a warrior. She doesn't. It's like, well, she's been around for thousands of years and fought against orcs and Morgoth and Sauron, and at this point, she probably has picked up a few battle skills.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you live that long, you're gonna become an expert in pretty much anything you set your mind to.
Yeah, it's like Groundhog Day. He thousands of years living in Punxsutawney. You pick up some piano. I thought that the scene with the the ice troll was a little goofy, and in sort of like the way that the Hobbit got a little goofy, with like a lot of like basically running
Yep.
on air and like these
Yeah.
big sort of flashy battles. But I didn't think it was unrealistic that Galadriel herself could take down a troll because she is badass. Like, I mean,
Yep.
she's a powerful, powerful character, and she didn't just get her power from. This is another thing I've heard people say. Well, she get her power from the rings, and it's like she got
No.
power from the rings, but she
Yeah.
didn't get all of her power from the rings. Those rings definitely were powerful objects, though, which I guess we'll
Right.
probably see more of in a show called Rings of Power. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
so
there's
yeah,
other ways they could have had her deal with the troll. That I mean, she probably could have dealt with that troll without having to resort to physically attacking it, just based on the inherent power within her from Valinor. She could have probably cowed it and caused it to run away, or just
mm.
you know stun it, or have it kneel down and give up.
In
But
the
I think
Hobbit movies, they use the same sort of magic as Harry Potter, just a beam of light against another beam
right
of light. That's how I think magic is actually in real life. Is just beams of
bees
conflicting
of yeah,
light.
I mean, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, and that it's tough because he never there's no scenes in Tolkien where elves do things like that, but he definitely talks about them being more in control of their physical facilities than men, um and being able to pull off incredible physical feats. But the way I would interpret that more is, instead of flying through the air, you know Wing Chun kung fu craziness, it'd be more that if she was in combat with a troll, it just wouldn't be able to hit her, and she would
Mm.
quickly and efficiently dispatch it, and that would be it.
Which she kind of did. It didn't hit her.
Yeah.
She quickly and efficiently dispatched it. It's
Yeah.
flashy. That felt very Hollywood to me, and I definitely will say that overall, I felt like the first two episodes captured, like you said, the themes of Tolkien. They certainly captured the aesthetic of Peter Jackson's
Yeah.
I feel like they really carried that torch very intentionally, and they weren't really action packed. Like I think a lot of people's complaint that I've seen is that they're kind of slow, but realistically, so is the Lord of the Rings, the books. They're not. These aren't like. I mean, there are moments of action, obviously. Like, oh, did I lose you? I lost you. I lost Patrick. Patrick, what happened? Am I? Did I lose my internet? There you are.
Yeah. Sorry, Chrome
Okay.
crashed. I don't know what
No,
happened.
that's okay. I've been having internet issues, so I thought maybe it was me, but
Yeah.
um,
I'm also
we'll just.
getting an alert that my local
No, don't worry about that.
space is
Oh,
full for the
your
backup.
local space? Oh, it should
My
be fine
space.
without it. You actually look clearer on my end now ever since it crashed. Maybe that was a good thing.
Yeah.
The video signal. Well, although now it's lagging. Now it's all messed up again, but it doesn't matter. It should be fine.
Okay.
So yeah, the books. They're not action packed. It's I remember as a kid, I read the Lord of the Rings when I was in fourth grade for the first time, and the very most difficult part for me was the very beginning, as a child reading through all that Shire stuff, which now I love. And I could honestly, sometimes I've just read the Shire portion of that book and then stopped because I just want to go to the Shire, and just for that, I don't want to do the whole thing. But it's slow, and part of it is that is how Tolkien wrote. And of course in the appendices and in these other the non Lord of the Rings books are a lot even drier than than the Lord of the Rings itself. Like it's a lot of history and it's a lot and I don't know. I think and I was thinking about this with House of the Dragon also. It's slow.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of audiences, a lot of people who are so used to fast action paced stuff all the time now that having these slower burns is a little jarring in a way. And I feel like maybe that's part of like people. That's a lot of the criticism I've seen, but I feel like that itself is kind of true to this particular story. Like we don't need it to be all ice troll battles,
No, definitely. Yeah. I mean, keep in mind this is the first 2 hours of what, like a
5
50-hour
season, yeah.
series potentially. Yeah. So they got to
Yeah,
do some establishment and um, setting the groundwork for the story. So I didn't mind it.
I I watched it
Um,
twice in 2 days or 3 days, so
yeah,
that's pretty good.
yeah,
In terms of other lore issues, Galadriel being the big one, that I definitely think that is a weird choice to have Gil-galad give her the passage from the Grey Havens back to Valinor. That was weird, and then of course she doesn't go anyways, which makes me question really. I mean, I guess they wanted to tie it in with what her brother tells her in the beginning, or whispers to her that we
hmm
don't hear. There's that dramatic effect. Um, but yeah, you were mentioning her husband and daughter are not in this.
so
Her
far.
other brothers are not in this. Of course, she did spend a significant amount of time not living with Celeborn, right? Um,
Yeah, I'd have to go back and check. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I do know there's significant periods where they'd gone their separate ways and are kind of doing their own thing. I think there's times where they split up where he's still in Eregion or in Lorien or in Moria and she's off elsewhere. Again, it depends on which
different,
version you accept as
yeah.
canon. But yeah,
It's hard
it's not.
when you're going off notes. It's hard because like all authors have a bunch of notes. Maybe not the extent of Tolkien's notes, but all authors have notes, and then they have a finished product where they choose which of those notes becomes the finished
Mhm.
product. But here we're just going off of a lot of different conflicting notes.
Yeah. Well, and plus I mean, it's a good age for them to pick to kind of play in because there's huge spans of time where we just don't know anything. So they could,
Yeah.
as long as it's consistent with what we know is going to happen and what did happen, um, they can, make up a lot. So
You just brought up Eregion, and when we were talking the other day, you had mentioned that it wouldn't have even. So the timeline, we're pretty sure that's Mithril in Durin's
yeah, for
Pulp
sure.
Fiction box,
Yep.
and but you had mentioned that the elves actually built that city because of the Mithril. Is that
If
right?
I'm
Am I remembering
remembering
that
right,
right?
yeah, yeah, it was
So they
because
came there to be close to Khazad-dûm.
yeah, and that's what formed kind of their friendship and their collaboration was the fact that Khazad-dûm was so rich in mithril that they were able to work together and create, greater works of art than they would have separately. And it's actually the closest elves and dwarves have ever became in Middle Earth in the histories, I believe. And so for them to, it was just it's a little bit off to have them going to Moria um, as strangers without having already had contact with them by the time Eregion is established and that settled. There would have been active interaction and cooperation already.
For
I
like
think.
hundreds of
Yeah,
years.
yeah. Well, and again,
Yeah,
it's hard to say because they've tweaked the timeline and condensed it so
right.
much. It's hard to tell where we are and what's contemporaneous and what happened first and what's going to happen next. So.
And then also Durin, you were saying there's only one Durin at a time.
Yeah, during the Deathless, he was the father of the Longbeards. He, uh, yeah, it's the same king, kind of reborn each generation, and so there would not be two Durins at the same time.
In the Lord of the Rings, is Durin is at the Lonely Mountain, or is
No,
there?
there's no more
There's no
Durins at
Durin,
that
no
point.
more
Yeah,
Durins.
yeah.
Who's at the Lonely Mountain? Who is it
Um,
that comes at the end of the Hobbit? I'm
that
just
is
forgetting names.
that's Dane.
Dane,
He's a
no,
cousin of
Dane. Yeah, it's a
he's
D
a
word though.
yeah he's a cousin he's a cousin of Thorin.
Okay,
Um,
Thorin plus Dane really sounds like Durin.
yeah.
Okay, so then that's another thing. So there's a number of little lore things that are that are off. I feel like the biggest one's still definitely like Galadriel's role in all of this. Would you say would that would be the big one? And then the
Um,
compressed timelines, like
yeah,
compressing all of this
yeah,
stuff into one span of time that would
yeah.
actually be hundreds and hundreds of years of time,
Or thousands
or
for something.
thousands. Yeah,
Yeah. Um, the other thing that was kind of bugging me was their interpretation of Elven society. You, elves accepted kings and accepted lords, but my impression has always been that they were very independent.
mm.
And so to have it represented that they had kind of like regiments and lines of command
Yeah.
um, outside of an actual military engagement. Um, just didn't quite sit right with me. That I could be off on that, but the whole having like a watchtower over the humans in
Hmm.
what will be Mordor, it looked like on the map. That was linked back to Gilgalad, where, as far as we know, he had no influence that far south and east. He
Right.
was really restricted to Lindon, and then to
It's
have
like
that.
they're yeah, it's like they're imprinting like Gondor and its structure of like humans watching out to protect the land with a very regimented military and all
Mhm,
that onto the elves.
mhm,
I think Tolkien was very, I feel like his utopian society was the Shire, right? And I read an interesting article years ago about how he was like an anarcho monarchist,
yeah,
which I think is a pretty good way to put it. Like the Shire is like a self-governing sort of anarchist community, right? There's not really a government, and they still pay
yeah,
homage to the king, but the king is really far away, so they don't really
and
have
yeah,
anything to do with the king. But
yeah,
that's still the king, maybe. But like they're a self governing sort of like peaceful utopia, and the elves are also sort of his idealistic
mhm,
society, which again is like you're saying, there's not really you never hear of like general this or commander that of the
yeah, yeah.
elves, and
No, it's
Elrond is like the lord of Rivendell, but he's not really the lord of like the lands around Rivendell. There's not like it's not a feudal system where there's like knights and lords that are coming and paying homage to him and bringing their taxes and all that.
yeah,
It's not quite like human
yeah.
structure.
It
Yeah.
so in his write ups in the Silmarillion in the first age when he's going over all the elf lords and their realms, it borders feudalism because there's definitely some lords that pay fealty to others, and there's a recognized high king. But yeah, it's not to the extent of what they've represented in the show. So what I would expect to see if they had someone watching, like a tower set up and someone watching the humans in Tir Harad, I think is what they said the name was.
Hmm.
It'd be more like that was a group of elves who had chosen to do that because they felt responsible
Right.
or a duty to do that. And then they would have, powerful elven lords and whatnot attract retinues. They would have their own retinues of elves that would have gone with them, but it wouldn't have been, Gilgalad commanded, go,
Right.
you know,
Calling the days of peace, and yeah.
drafting people and then declaring war and declaring peace. And
Well,
it,
even
it,
historically,
so
like there
long.
wasn't. I mean, in medieval England or Europe, there weren't really like standing armies
No.
until much more recently.
Yeah.
There weren't even, the king wouldn't have a large standing army that they would send out to into posts all around the country. Local lords would have their, some degree of like their knights who would go out and do that kind of thing, and there would be the town, the town guard or whatever. But there wasn't like this like we have today with a massive army or
Mhm.
federal system, and certainly you don't get well. And there's the other thing, like Lord of the Rings is a post-apocalyptic in a lot of ways, a
Yeah.
post-apocalyptic story,
Yeah.
whereas the Second Age in the where we're introduced in the show is not. It's a rebuilt society living in peace with a lot more. Um, but at the same time, I mean, I don't know. Like that's like you said, there's a lot of room to play with. But you have these big elven cities, and it's just not the same level of ruin and decay that you get when you get to Lord of the Rings. And I wonder if maybe they're just trying to show a more robust society where there is, more
Yeah.
influence of
Possibly.
the king and
Possibly.
just like more civilization in general. I
Mhm.
guess I don't know. I thought that seemed weird too, though. I
Yeah.
didn't really. I,
What? And
I,
so you're talking, in the Middle Ages, in real history with humans, you know, wars had to be very scheduled because the Lord
right.
had to call his muster. He had to get everybody together. Then they would, march out and face each other, or usually ransack the
Siege.
countryside and then lay siege. Um,
Yeah.
so
But
in
in
the
all the
first,
TV battles, it's all like people whacking at each other with
yeah,
swords with no
yeah,
no formation, and it's yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So in the first age, for much of the time, the elves, it's actually called the Siege of Angband, which was Morgoth's fortress in the north. And so there wouldn't have been a separation of like civilians and military in those elven societies. Like every elf would have been a warrior, um, and every elf would have been expected to fight. Um, for the most part. I'm sure that there's elven children and elven people that wouldn't have been able to fight, but every elf who was able to fight would have been expected to fight. Um, Putting aside gender roles and all that, let's not get into that. Um, but and so that probably would have extended, into other elven societies into the second age. That's just the expectation, because you're not, elves aren't people. They live
Right.
forever. They have infinite time, essentially. And so an elf can be all things. He can be a vintner and a farmer and a warrior and a poet. And so you don't, in my mind, you wouldn't have as extreme a uh, segregation of society into specialties. Elves would have just been individuals who are capable of doing many different things, and so an elven army would just be all the elves
Right.
getting together and getting ready to fight. Um,
Totally.
and so to portray Arondir and those guys as like some sort of force that's been drafted and sent to this foreign land at Gil-galad's command just seems, I don't know. It rubbed my interpretation of how Tolkien wrote about the elves the wrong way.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. Like, I'm sure other people were fine with it, and it didn't bug them.
No, and I think that's a really good point, and I think it speaks to like, you know, well, this is a problem with adapt. Anyone who's going to go and take a crack at adapting something like this is going to have their own interpretation and then their own way of trying to speak to the audience and craft a story, and then of course everyone who's watching has their own interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when Peter Jackson's films came out, I had a lot of problems with those movies. They're good. They're really good movies, but there were so many little things that bothered me because I just pictured it differently. I thought about it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've softened a little maybe over the years since then, so that when I come into an adaptation like this, even when I'm like, okay, that's not really how I picture that either. It's like, okay, whatever. I'm not even going to worry about it. But yeah, at the same time, when you talk about it that way, I think I wish that when they had made this adaptation, that they had people on board who thought about these things,
Mm-hmm.
like the hierarchy and structure of elves, like because it isn't just a fantasy where there's armies of elves. Like the elven society is a pretty like Tolkien did spend a lot of time painting that picture of what that society was like and what
Mm-hmm.
elves are like. And they are sort of based to some degree. Certainly if you start with the Hobbit, the elves in the Hobbit are they feel a lot like Fae from
Yeah.
myth, almost pranksters in the woods, and he obviously developed that a lot further, but they are very different than humans. And I guess there are these elements of like drafted soldiers that feel very human.
Mm-hmm.
That I think is definitely more distracting than the fact that like Arondir is black. Which seems to be the big complaint right now, is that, oh my God, there's a black elf. Tolkien would be rolling in his grave. Well,
No.
I think Tolkien might be rolling in his grave because of all of the stuff that we have done with his stories, including the movies and the fucking video games and the merchandising. But certainly I think that a black elf or a black Harfoot is way down the list of the things that Tolkien might be rolling in his grave over. I know he was like a conservative Catholic, but I don't think he was that concerned with. The books, the stories don't really concern themselves much with race at all, outside of elves and dwarves and hobbits. So,
yeah, there's been accusations levied against Tolkien as being racist because all the good guys are Northwestern European white guys, and all the bad guys are Easterlings and Southrons and have dark skin, and the his physical descriptions of the orcs are a little problematic, but that misinterprets some of his writing. So I think we were talking about this earlier. He wrote in letters that he always pictured Numenor as very Egyptian, more so than European. And even like Gondor and Minas Tirith, he pointed out that if you assumed the latitude of the Shire was England, then Gondor would be the Mediterranean, and that society would be much more Italian and
Middle Eastern even.
Middle Eastern, even,
Yeah,
Byzantine. Um, and so it's not that all the good guys are, blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guys. Um, and then, I think his use of the Easterlings and the Southrons it is problematic, but I don't think it's problematic on a personal level for Tolkien. I think it's him being a product of his time
sure.
and reflecting that to someone in England. The East and the South are, the lands of shadow, the lands we don't know about, the lands where, the unknown comes from.
Right.
And I think that is what is being reflected in his writings there. I don't know of any evidence where he had any incidences of, personal racism against,
Right.
non-white people.
And it is important to look at everyone as a product of their time, because you can look at other authors around that time who are explicitly racist.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
what's
I mean,
his face?
Lovecraft is,
Lovecraft
yeah.
is a great example.
Yep.
Perfect example of a deeply racist,
Mm-hmm.
like other people in his time would have looked at him and said, that dude's a racist.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I mean,
uh,
even Robert E. Howard with Conan, a lot of his stuff is way more problematic than Tolkien's
sure.
writings. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that exoticism in a lot of that writing, like that comes out and can be pretty problematic for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need a barbarian revolution in fantasy right now, where we can have like cool Conan style stories, but without all the racist overtones and
Mm-hmm.
whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so, well, yeah, and like Tarzan and all that. Yeah, there's plenty of
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the point. I guess the point for me with the race stuff is, other than like it's really disappointing to see so many racists or people who are making arguments on behalf of racists. It's just that if this were a fantasy world where race was an important part of the story, I would also want them to cast it appropriately. Because if, in your fantasy story,
Mm-hmm.
there is some xenophobia or some, something where race actually comes into the story in an important way, well, then you better cast that appropriately so that you can tell that story. But in Lord of the Rings, it's just not a factor.
Yeah.
It's just not. Like who, if we made the Lord of the Rings today and they cast Idris Elba as Boromir, I'd be all for it. Like
That'd be awesome.
who cares, right? Like, is what I mean. Good actors and good scripts. That's much more important. But anyway, so I think we've gone over a lot of the lore stuff. But what
Yeah,
you
and
say?
just one more
Sorry.
thing I wanted to say is, if you don't have a problem with them getting a character's hair color wrong in the casting, but you have a problem with them, quote unquote, getting someone's skin color wrong, then you need to ask yourself why that is.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, look at Brandon Sanderson. He made a whole. He's working on this whole fantasy which is based on different eye colors being
Mm-hmm.
the different factor in like class divisions, right? So why are we not worried about eye color? It's just this arbitrary. But I mean, how do dwarves get black skin if they live underneath the ground? it's just such a preposterous argument.
Yeah.
It's amazing that people can make these arguments and actually feel like they're defending Tolkien or something. It's so strange.
Yeah.
But I thought maybe we can move on to your theories about the stranger.
Sure.
Because I thought that was a pretty cool. You were texting us in the group text earlier about the possibility of it. Because my gut instinct was that this is Gandalf, and then I was like, no, it's too early for Gandalf.
Mm-hmm.
And then then I read. Never once crossed my mind that it could be Sauron. But then I was reading people saying this is Sauron, and I just think no, there's no way it's Sauron. That seems like, what would be the point of Sauron coming back like this?
Yeah.
Especially being around the Harfoots. I mean, is he just going to kill them all? Like, it just doesn't work in any way. But okay, but then you were thinking that it could be Gandalf.
I mean, that would be an interesting character arc for Sauron, where the Harfoots, tug at his heart and maybe make him repent to a certain degree,
And then he turns bad again.
And then he remembers, like, no, screw this, like, I got things to do.
And then an elf shows up and kills all the hobbits,
Yeah.
and then he's like, "No, damn you, elves! I'm going to trick you with rings."
Yeah, that would not go over well. No, so based on kind of the imagery of him in the center of that fire, looking like the Eye of Sauron, and it just being creepy and imposing. I was leaning towards is he Sauron, like that theory, but the more I thought about it, I kind of stopped myself. Okay, and said, let's just look at what they've presented so far, what makes sense and what doesn't. And I got to the place where, like you were just saying, is no, it doesn't make sense. Why would Sauron have returned to Middle Earth in this fashion? With amnesia, and falling out of the sky, completely, helpless and not knowing where he was, or incapable of speech. And there's nothing that indicates at this point, after the War of Wrath and well, presumably the beginning of the Second Age, or who knows, um, uh, you know, that he would be in that state. He went into hiding. He fled from the armies of the west of the Valar because he refused to repent. And until he shows back up again, we don't really know what he's up to. But there's no evidence that he was, at the mercy of proto hobbits. And so without additional information or background on that, there's not really any reason to think it would be Sauron. And I don't think from a story standpoint, the more I thought about it, it didn't really make a lot of sense. And so the other big option people are talking about is Gandalf or one of the other Istari. And the more I thought about Gandalf, kind of the more it started to make sense, and I started to kind of piece things together and have some revelations. So thematically and also kind of broad pop culturally, that it would make the most sense, I think, for it to be Gandalf, especially the relationship with the Harfoots. Because as I think everybody knows, in the Lord of the Rings, he had a special relationship with the hobbits. He always considered them of much more highly than anybody else of the wise did. Most of the wise didn't even really know they were around. And so to establish that relationship going back to now makes sense. And then also it would be very Tolkien-esque if a Loren, who is Gandalf is his name given by men of the North, came to the Harfoots intentionally because he had some sort of foresight and knew that they would be critical to the downfall of Sauron eventually. So he's trying to help them and shepherd them through these dark times and protect them. But when I had that thought, then I was trying to think, well, why would he have shown up, flaming, falling out of the sky and arrive, amnesiac with no power, unable to even speak? And I think what makes sense is that he was intercepted by another Maiar, probably Sauron, and there was a conflict there, and he got, the worst of it and ended up falling into a random place that just so happened to be near the Harfoots. And that is very Tolkien-esque too, because then that is demonstrating kind of, the hand of Eru or Iluvatar in all of this and guiding him to where he needs to be to help the people that, thousands of years from now will ultimately defeat Sauron. And so, if it was Sauron that intercepted him and attacked him, and rendered him in the state he currently is, in a way through the hand of Eru has sown the seeds of his own destruction eventually. So I could definitely see them going in that direction with it being Gandalf, who was trying to come to Middle Earth to help or for whatever purpose. Sauron intercepted him, messed him up, defeated him, and he fell and happened to land near the Harfoots. And now I think that's going to be a parallel storyline to the overall bigger story of the Rings of Power and everything. And there might be some crossovers here and there, but I don't think they're going to have a big impact on the bigger, broader plot. And it's just going to follow them trying to get where they can be sheltered and safe from everything that's going to go down in the Second Age, and which wouldn't be the Shire at this point yet. They don't arrive into the Shire until well into the Third Age, if I remember right.
Though you never know, they could
yeah,
still make it that,
yeah.
right? They can tweak it. Yeah, I like that theory. I like it because it does remind me, like, Sauron intercepting Gandalf. Eventually, he's called Gandalf, and then inadvertently introducing him to the Harfoots and just setting that whole thing in motion is sort of reminiscent of like sparing Gollum and then Gollum falling with the ring into the pit. It's this unintended consequences of in that case mercy, in this case trying to be an evil sorcerer and destroy the world or conquer the world, whatever. Yeah, no, I like that. And then there's the question of like, where is Sauron? Who is Sauron? Have we seen him already? He's a
Yeah.
shapeshifter. Will we, has he already been introduced in the first couple episodes? And then the Morgul Blade, the character of Theo, who
Mm-hmm.
seems to me like to have already a dark side to him.
Yep.
You had, mentioned the Nine Rings. Will
Yeah.
somebody
Yeah.
like that character maybe get, be one of the recipients of a ring?
Yeah, I definitely think one of these human characters that they're introducing is going to be one of the ring recipients from Sauron of one of the nine, and it's going to be a big like, oh my god moment when the other characters that were formerly his companions and friends have to face him as a Nazgul. I think that's
Yeah.
definitely a direction they're going.
Yeah, there's so much there is just so much to play with. I think that's one of the great things about an adaptation that is like so off the beaten path, doesn't just follow a prescribed story that Tolkien has written. It's kind of fun because you don't know exactly. You have some ideas and you can work with those theories, but you also don't know,
Hmm.
and so you can be surprised and you can
Yeah.
have mysteries. You can, like the whole this character of the stranger. It's fun that we don't know who it is, and that
Hmm.
it's one of the, it's like when the first season of Westworld came out. Westworld, of course, was based on the movie Westworld, but it didn't follow the same script.
Yep.
It gave us a lot of new mysteries and a lot of things to theorize about. There was and then these the timelines and everything else. It's just kind of I don't know. I think that's the silver lining of an adaptation that does go really far afield and does change the lore. It does do all that stuff. There's pros and cons,
Yeah.
obviously,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, if it's a good story and it's
yeah,
compelling, um, what's to complain about?
right,
Like it's entertainment.
yeah,
And if you're a Tolkien purist, then stick to the books. Don't watch it.
right. You don't need to
Yeah,
watch the
nobody's forcing
adaptations.
you. Like,
They're never going to be good enough, though, right? That's the thing. Like, if you're a Tolkien purist, the Peter Jackson movies were an atrocity
oh yeah, for
in
sure.
many ways.
I mean, yeah, Christopher Tolkien hated him, like
Right.
allegedly. So
Well, and I get it. Like, I get if that's what you want, if that's what you're looking for, is something very. I still think it'd be great to have a very true to the books animated limited series for the Lord of the Rings.
yeah, that would be
You
amazing.
know, draw in a great art style that harkens back to some of the classic Tolkien art. Told as close to the books as possible,
Hmm.
slow and long. Each book gets like a 12 episode animated season. You've got 3 seasons or whatever. Wouldn't that be cool? I'd love that, right? But
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
w- until you do that, and you're just trying to make a movie or something, or you're building off this fiction of the Second Age, which has so many holes, we're not going to get anything like that.
Hmm.
And I'm happy with either one, I guess. At least
Yeah,
we get cool fantasy out of it, with it's awesome music, and like I think the special effects are incredible, the costumes are incredible. I mean, I really don't understand people saying it looks cheap.
yeah,
That seems
I
bizarre to
agree.
me.
That just seems like people trying to find reasons to just like
Yeah,
grasping at whatever they can. It's no, it
yeah.
looks amazing.
I think Galadriel could be taller.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I do think she could be taller.
Uh,
All right. Well, cool. Well, that was fun. We'll have to keep doing this with some of these the following episodes. I think it'd be fun to kind of talk, like unpack
yeah.
them and talk about them. Maybe get Ian and Marcus in on it, and um, just
Yes.
I don't know.
See if any of these theories play out. See
Yeah,
what
exactly.
story. Yeah.
See if that's actually mithril or if it's Marcellus Wallace's soul. Uh, it could be either. I don't
Could be both.
know.
Maybe he had a mithril soul.
Could be a mithril soul. Yeah, new band name idea right there.
There you go. That's a good
Mithril
one.
Soul, or like a Dark Souls spin-off game, like Mithril
Nice.
Souls.
You have to be a dwarf fighting
we
through.
need,
Oh, that'd be
you know,
awesome. Actually, that's a good idea. Mithril souls. You could be a
yeah.
dwarf fighting in the War of Orcs and Dwarves in the Third Age when they try to
Okay,
retake Moria, and it's like, yeah, and so you're fighting through
that'd
like
be
all the
sweet.
wind tunnels of Moria against like all these orcs and stuff. That'd
Oh
be
shit, yeah, that would be really cool. Actually, that's a good idea for like a tabletop game,
yeah, that'd
like
be yeah.
like like just a dungeon crawler, but like
Yeah, concept for a campaign.
dwarven,
Yeah.
yeah, dwarven campaign. I thought a cool one for a campaign would be if Sauron if they didn't throw the ring in and Sauron got the ring back, and it was like
Then
after
what do you do?
Sauron got the ring back, like then what happens? Like it's kind of like the Man in the High Tower. What if the Nazis
Yeah.
or Wolfenstein or something, But all right, cool. Well, I'm going to stop this before we go on too long.